Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Export Skills Program session. And today, of course, a continuation of our Cyber Readiness module. And today we're going to take a look at some of the current threats that we face in the cybersecurity realm. I'm Collins Rex, and I'm a director with the Global Trade Professionals Alliance. The GTPA is an organisation that cultivates international standards within the industry, and our aim is to create a trade environment that is both inclusive and trusted by all. And the GTPA has partnered with Global Victoria to deliver this comprehensive export skills program. There are still several sessions to go before we get to the end of the program, not just in the cyber module, but across some of the others. So feel free to visit the address that you see on your screen, and you can register for any of the remaining sessions. For this cybersecurity module, we have partnered with the Cyber Readiness Institute. The Cyber Readiness Institute is based in the United States, and it convenes senior leaders of global companies and supply chain partners. It shares cybersecurity best practices and resources, and it develops content and tools to improve the cyber readiness of SMEs. As always, I draw your attention to the disclaimer on the screen. Please make sure that if you are going to take anything as business advice, that you make sure it is relevant to you and your organization. And of course, as you know by now, the webinar is being recorded. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, which for me is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. And I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Straits Islanders peoples who might be joining us in today's webinar. So as I mentioned, I am Collins Rex. I'm a director with the Global Trade Professionals Alliance, amongst other things, and I am also a Cyber Readiness Institute certified cyber readiness coach. So let's get straight into it, shall we? And as always, of course, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box, and I will give you my email address at the end of today's session, should you wish to get hold of a copy of today's deck. So we're going to look today at some of the most dangerous virus and malware threats that have sort of raised their rather ugly heads in 2022. We're also going to look at an Australian threat overview, and finally today, some of the key cyber attacks that have already occurred in 2022. By no stretch of the imagination an exhaustive list, but certainly ones that are unique for their own reasons, and we'll look at those in a little bit of time. So starting off with some of those most dangerous virus and malware threats in 2022. We start off with CLOP ransomware. So ransomware, as you know, is a malware that encrypts your files until you pay a ransom to the hackers. Well, CLOP is one of the latest and most dangerous ransomware threats. It's a variant of a well-known crypto mix ransomware, which frequently targets Windows users. Before beginning the encryption process, the CLOP ransomware blocks over 600 Windows processes, and it disables multiple Windows 10 applications, including, of course, the key things like Windows Defender and Microsoft Security Essentials. And that means you have zero chance of protecting your data. The CLOP ransomware has evolved since its inception, and it now targets more than individual machines. It also targets entire networks. Even the Maastricht University in the Netherlands became a victim of the CLOP ransomware, with almost all Windows devices on the university's network being encrypted and forced to pay a ransom. The next threat that I'd like to focus on is fake Windows updates that come with the rather added surprise of hidden ransomware. So hackers have been increasingly sending emails that instruct readers to install urgent Windows operating system updates. The emails trick readers into installing the latest so-called Windows updates, which are actually ransomware exe files in disguise. The ransomware contained in these emails is known as Cyborg. It encrypts all of your files and programs, and then it demands a ransom payment to unencrypt the files. Now, many email service providers and even a number of basic antivirus software packages just aren't able to detect and block these emails. So that's why you really need to be using an antivirus that provides proper internet security. But even more importantly, this is one of the key reasons why your staff needs to be cyber ready. The next threat is Zeus Game Over. It's part of the Zeus family of malware and viruses, as you would expect. And this piece of malware is a Trojan, which is malware disguised as something legitimate. So the classic Greek Trojan horse that brought Troy to its knees. It accesses your sensitive bank account details, and then it steals all your money. So the worst thing about this particular variant of the Zeus malware family is that it doesn't require a centralized command and control server to complete transactions, which is a flaw found in many cyber attacks that authorities can target. Instead, Zeus Game Over can bypass centralized servers, and it can create independent servers to send sensitive information. So in essence, once it has stolen the data, it is gone forever. It cannot be tracked because of the pathway that it takes. Just as we have software as a service, we now have the gift that keeps on giving, ransomware as a service, or RAS. It's a growing industry in the underground hacker community. And people without knowledge to carry out a sophisticated ransomware attack can pay to hire a professional hacker or a team of hackers to perform the attack for them. So just as you get your software as a service and you download what you need from the cloud when you need it, so you can do it with the bad stuff too. So the growth of the underground RAS industry is actually really concerning because it shows how easy it is to infect people with ransomware, despite the bad actors having no experience with designing or coding malware. The next one is one I think that we've all encountered, particularly over the last couple of years. And it's a particularly insidious one because it really appeals to a lot of human frailties. And this is the news malware attacks. Cybercriminals use current news stories and global events to target people with malware. So, for example, hackers might use the current wave of flu outbreaks to target individuals with malware. Hackers send out emails that are disguised as legitimate information about the outbreak, and then readers are prompted to click a link to learn more about the information, but the link contains malware that copies the files on your device and steals your personal information. There was a whole spate of these attacks that were linked to COVID, for example, because people were just so desperate for information to know how to protect themselves, etc. Immediately after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a similar spate of news malware attacks were launched. And it will be the same, irrespective of what the next basic news item is that everybody wants to know more about. Now, research currently focuses on the spread of this malware, particularly in Japan, where it is quite rife, but it will become an issue worldwide, and it does become an issue worldwide whenever there is any kind of newsworthy event. The next bit of nefarious activity that I'd like to highlight is particularly marked if you are an Android phone user. And this is fleeceware. So fleeceware continues to charge app users large amounts of money despite users deleting those apps. So let's say, for example, you have downloaded Angry Birds to play on your Android device, and you have purchased some items to enable you to play the game and get to higher levels, etc. You stop using the game, you uninstall the app, but the app seems to still be charging you for services, and it's impossible for you to stop it. That is fleeceware. The money doesn't go to the app at all. The money, of course, gets siphoned off, but that app is the one that seems to be continuing the charge. Now, research found that over 600 million Android users have downloaded fleeceware onto their device in the past few years without being aware of it. Although fleeceware doesn't pose a considerable security threat to the device and the data, it is very common, and it's a shady practice by app developers who want to catch in on unsuspecting users. So be aware of that. IoT device attacks are also becoming far more prevalent. So as the popularity of the Internet of Things grows in this year and into the future, things like smart speakers, video doorbells, etc., hackers are looking for ways to exploit those devices for valuable information. Now, why is it, do you think, that a hacker would want to access your doorbell? Well, there are multiple reasons why hackers choose to target IoT devices. For one, most devices don't have enough storage to install proper security measures. They often contain easy to access data such as passwords and usernames, which can then be used by hackers to log into user accounts and steal valuable information such as banking details. Hackers can also use internet-based cameras and mics to spy on and communicate with people, and that includes young children via smart baby monitors. And of course, that opens up a whole world of despicable crime. These devices also act as weak points in a corporation's network, meaning that hackers can gain access to entire systems through unsecured IoT devices, spreading malware to other devices across the network. So if your office has one of those delightful video doorbells installed, that can be hacked, and through that hack, access might be gained into the rest of your system. Cryptojacking is, well, it was a matter of time before people would find a way to steal cryptocurrency. So cryptojacking malware is designed to use someone's computing power to help mine cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin. Mining requires a huge amount of computing power to generate new crypto coins, which is why hackers are attempting to install cryptojacking malware on computers and mobile devices to help with the mining process. This then slows down the user's device considerably as the cryptocurrency is being finagled and stolen. Although cryptojacking attacks dropped significantly in previous years, mainly due to the sharp fall in the value of cryptocurrencies, this trend remains a threat, and every time there's a spike in the value of crypto, the attacks resurface. Cryptocurrency prices have continued to rise through 2022. And of course, Bitcoin has boomed as recently as January. Because of the value of cryptocurrency, cryptojacking malware attacks will continue to be lucrative. And as long as there's something in it for the bad guys, they will keep doing it. Looking now at artificial intelligence attacks or AI attacks. As more tools become available to developers who want to program AI scripts and software, hackers, of course, use the same technology to carry out cyber attacks, and some of those with absolutely devastating consequences. Although cybersecurity companies use artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to combat malware, these technologies can also be turned the other way, and they are exploited to hack devices and networks on a massive scale. Cyber attacks often cost cyber criminals a lot in terms of time and resources. It takes time to figure out how to do this bad work. You use AI and machine learning, a lot of the bad work is done for you. So as this year draws on, and in fact, as we move into the future, we can definitely expect that more and more hackers will be developing highly advanced and destructive AI-based malware. And that will extend way beyond this year. Looking now at some specific threats that have been identified in the Australian landscape. And most of these threats have been identified and talked about by the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. There is, of course, the ongoing threat of ransomware. So you need to continue to be very vigilant when it comes to ransomware and how you protect your organization, including ensuring that everyone in your organization is cyber ready. Threat actors believed to be associated with Conti, which is a particularly nasty type of ransomware, have claimed that they will target unspecified critical infrastructure in response to cyber or military actions against Russia. The ACSC has recently updated a profile on Conti's background, their threat activity and mitigation advice. So be aware of that and make sure that you keep your eyes and ears open. There's also an ongoing state-sponsored targeting of network devices of which you need to be familiar. So state-sponsored actors, and when we're talking about state-sponsored actors, we're talking about those who are actually attached to specific countries. These actors continue to target routers, for example, and other network devices. Now, there has been an alert out for some time relating to Russian state-sponsored targeting of network devices, but there are several others out there as well. The particular ones that relate to Russian state-sponsored targeting are specifically geared towards certain Cisco features. And if you want to know more about that, you can visit the website for some mitigating things to be aware of, and also ways in which you might be able to identify and then protect yourself. There's also the exploitation of default multi-factor authentication protocols and known vulnerabilities for network access. So the US CISA and the Federal Bureau of Investigation have both released a joint cybersecurity advisory to warn organizations that default multi-factor authentication configuration has been exploited. And this then works in combination with known vulnerabilities to allow malicious cyber actors to obtain access to networks. This is something which may not have direct bearing on most SMEs, but it is something of which you need to be aware, and that is possible threats to satellite communication networks. So the US Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the FBI have released a joint cybersecurity advisory that relates to threats to satellite communication networks. The advisory includes mitigation advice, and you really do need to ensure that any information is encrypted prior to transmission via any satellite. So if yours is an organization that is using satellite communication, perhaps with remote offices, etc., you need to be aware of this threat because things might be stolen along the chain. This is an interesting one, and it's malicious activity that occurs against internet-connected, uninterruptible power supply devices. Now, just about every office will have a UPS to ensure that if there are power outages, you don't lose crucial parts of your network. Computers don't immediately switch off, etc. And again, KISA and the Department of Energy have warned that malicious cyber actors have gained access to internet-connected, uninterruptible power supply devices. And this is often done through default passwords. So if on your devices you have not reset the passwords, you're still using the factory set default password, you are at imminent risk. You have to ensure that your device management interfaces are not accessible from the internet and that any default passwords have been changed. So let's look now at some of those key cyber attacks that have already occurred this year. And there are, as I said, a multitude of these, but we're just going to pick on a couple to highlight specific aspects of the sorts of attack that are occurring. The first one is Toyota, and this is probably one of the most well-known of recent times as well. Of course, we all know Toyota, they make motor cars. They were forced to halt production at all the Japanese plants after one of the major suppliers was hit with a cyber attack. That attack disrupted Toyota's parts supply management system. The supplier, Kojima Industries, provides plastic parts to Toyota. not a major supplier, but downstream of Toyota and the most vulnerable part in their supply chain. Toyota subsidiaries Hino Motors and Daihatsu Motor were also forced to cease operations at some plants in Japan. The key reason why this is an important case study and an important attack of which to be aware, it was a supply chain attack. And as we've discussed in the past, there's a supply chain, you're downstream of some of your upstream buyers, yours is the weakest link, yours is the one that might be exploited, and that will not only seriously affect your reputation, but it will affect your upstream buyer, and therefore you will probably not be dealing with them again in future. The next attack is that occurred on Aon. Aon, of course, a professional services and insurance giant that also provides cybersecurity services. It itself also experienced a cyber attack earlier this year. In a statement to investors, it said that it had an incident in February. It impacted a limited number of systems, but it didn't provide any further details. They've since gone ahead and launched an inquiry into the breach. And this one is important simply because it proves that nobody is safe from cyber attacks, even those who actually are supposed to protect us against them. The Montana-based Logan Health Medical Center notified over 200,000 patients, employees, and others earlier this year that all their personal and health data could have been accessed in an attack. So a sophisticated cyber attack was launched on the Logan Health IT system, and it led to unlawful entry of a file server, and that server contained protected health information. The comprised data varied by individual. It might have included names, social security numbers, dates of birth, etc. In some cases, it also contained information about their medical history. You can imagine what happens when a medical organization of this nature has their data compromised. First of all, it's almost impossible to access the data, and therefore people's lives are at risk because they can't be adequately treated. And of course, if that data falls into the wrong hands, it is potentially very damaging for the individuals concerned. The next attack I'd like to mention is that on the International Committee of the Red Cross. Now, the Red Cross, you would think, would be above all of this and nobody would really want to touch them. But the truth is, the bad guys don't really care how good the work is that you do. So a targeted cyber attack was launched against the servers of the Red Cross, and it was coordinated by a state-backed hacking group. The attackers managed to gain access to the personal information of over 515,000 people in the Restoring Family Links program that helps reunite families separated by war, disaster, and migration. The intruders were able to access servers for 70 days after the initial breach. So not just the initial breach, but that enormous period of time, the breach simply could not be contained. So you can imagine how much damage was done in that period of time. And again, if you think of the vulnerable people whose data was put out into the public domain, potentially devastating for families and others. Puma was attacked earlier this year, and of course, Puma, the sportswear manufacturer. It was hit by a data breach following a ransomware attack on one of its suppliers. So again, a supply chain issue. The workforce management service provider Kronos was attacked by ransomware way back in December, and that followed all the way through into 2022. Personally identifiable information, and we've talked about PII in the past, belonging to Puma's employees was stolen, and it's estimated that around 6,600 employees had their data stolen. And if you consider some of the data that would have been held by that service provider, it would have included banking details so that salaries could be paid across, etc. Enormous breach and very, very damaging. Samsung had an attack launched on them by the data extortion group Lapsus, and they were accessed, leaked in confidential information was put out into the public domain, and that also could have contained, and they've not confirmed this or not, but it could have contained the source code of Galaxy phones. Nearly 190 gigabytes of data were stolen, and they were made available to the public via a torrent. So the bottom line in all of this, remember the core four. If you concentrate on the core four and the policies that we have discussed, you will protect passwords and multi-factor authentication and make it more difficult for nefarious actors to access your systems through passwords that they've been able to hack. Software updates, if you always install software updates as and when you should, including security patches, but you only do it through recognized sources, and there is a cyber leader who controls when and how the software updates occur, you are far less likely to install updates that are not genuine, like the one that we've talked about earlier today for Microsoft. You will help to prevent phishing attacks if your staff is aware of what the contents of emails can contain, and if anything seems suspicious, they do not open it without checking first. And of course, our friends, the USB and those secure file storage and transfers. If you take care of the core four, you make sure that your entire team is cyber aware and cyber ready. You may not be able to ward off every attack, but you will certainly get close to it. And that brings us to the end of today's session. If there are any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box. And while you're doing that, just a reminder of the next phase in the program for which you can register. And there's only one session left after today. In the next session, we're going to talk more about how you can become a certified cyber leader and move through that program if you are interested in doing so. And as you might recall, 10 of the organizations that have been going through this program will be selected to go through that program. So make sure that you're online at this time next week to get all the details of how we're going to do that and how you can make sure that you register your expression of interest. Adrian asks what mitigation systems are available to defend against IoT device hacks. Adrian, it's pretty much the same awareness issues. The thing about IoT is because the devices are linked, it's one of those devices that is going to be attacked. And one of those devices will probably be attacked because of password that has been hacked, or it's going to be accessed through issues around software that has been updating for that particular device. So again, the core four apply equally there as they do for everything else. You need to make sure that passwords are not the default passwords that were issued with the devices. And all of these devices have some sort of password protection on them. If you take it out of the box, you need to make sure that you absolutely install the latest software that you can and that you update your password before you start using the device. That is one of the main key areas for mitigation around that. Unfortunately, unlike your internet service provider or your email service provider, you cannot have virus protection software that is going to check things like your doorbell, for example. So if it's connected to the internet through a standard device like a desktop or a laptop, for example, your software can be checked through those protection devices. But if it's something that is connected to other devices, but it doesn't come with software protection like a doorbell or a baby monitor, again, you're going to have to make sure that you specifically check those passwords. But it's also really important that you are aware of how those devices are being used at all times. And if anything seems suspicious, you need to immediately disconnect them from your network and remove them. Once you've removed it, you've broken the chain. But if they've already accessed, unfortunately, there's not awfully much you can do other than go into some mitigation and disaster recovery, essentially. So I hope that has answered your question. And if you want, I will send you some offline information specifically around IoT as well. So just drop me an email and remind me of that, because I might forget when I get off the call. And that, of course, also applies to anything that you need in terms of decks and so forth. If you would like a copy of today's deck or any of the others that we've already had in this series, please drop me an email and I will make sure that I send you the necessary. It seems that was the only question. I don't see any others. So thank you everyone for being part of today's session. There is so much information out there about threats, but I think it's important that we just are aware of some of the key ones and have the understanding that it almost doesn't matter what the threat is. If you take care of the core four, you can mitigate a lot of the damage that can occur if there is a breach. And of course, we also have our disaster recovery strategy in place that we've discussed at previous sessions if a breach does occur. Thanks everyone for being part of today's session. I look forward to the pleasure of your company again next Friday when we cover off our last session in the cyber readiness module. And I'm also looking forward to seeing some of you put your hands up to be part of that Cyber Leader Program, the Certified Cyber Leader Program with CRI. Have a wonderful Friday and have a good long weekend if you are having one. And if you are going to be on the roads, please be careful and remember that it's not just cyber threats we need to be aware of, but also physical ones as well. Thanks everyone. Have a good one. Go off and do some good, safe business. Goodbye.